Hi, welcome to this week's With Liberty and Justice for Some. I'm Congressman Mark Pocan. Prior to serving in Congress, I served 14 years in the Wisconsin State Assembly, where I have a true fondness for state government and for the work that can be done there. And I've always thought one of the absolute best jobs in state government is lieutenant governor. It's a position that's obviously important to state government. It's the backup role to the governor, but it's also a job that whoever has it can take it in pretty much any direction they want to and make their own imprint on state government. And I worked with many lieutenant governors over the years and always admired how each one uniquely takes that role on. And it's no different for our current lieutenant governor. Wisconsin's 46th lieutenant governor is Sara Rodriguez. Sara is a former member of the Wisconsin State Assembly, the place that I served at, but different times. And she also is a working mom. Prior to her roles in state government, she worked in public health and population health management and played in a variety of roles in healthcare, both public and private. So maybe someday she'll share with us what population health management is. But first, I'm going to ask a quick question to Salam Bhatti from the Food Research and Action Center, also known as FRAC. Thanks for being with us, Salam.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So my question for you is, if you had this magical power where you could change any one federal law, what would that one federal law be that you'd like to see changed?
I would create a guaranteed income.
Okay. Tell us a little more.
Creating a guaranteed income would help families with low income be able to better afford all the necessary expenses and have a little extra to buy all the other things that they need. It would also help, take over other government benefit programs and no longer require them. So this would be great in making more efficient government. Mm-hmm. It would allow more autonomy and dignity for the families who would receive it. It would be a huge boost to the economy because it would have a great economic impact. People would be spending a lot more, which is fantastic for everybody. And so that's what I would do. I would implement a guaranteed income. And it would also, my whole goal is to work myself out of a job. That would get me out of my job for sure.
Yeah. And, if you think about it, all those federal and state programs and even local programs that are used to help people who are in need, if those don't exist, that's kind of overhead that can go to direct assistance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. And thanks for all the work you're doing. And now back to our main guest. Here is our Lieutenant Governor, Sara Rodriguez. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. This is awesome. We've done a lot of these with folks at the federal level, but Wisconsin's a state everyone's watching all the time, whether it be because we're a purple state, whether it's because we've done so much innovation over history. I mean, in Wisconsin, from fighting Bob La Follette to current, we're a state that people ask questions about, and I get those on the floor a lot. So I thought this would be a great podcast, and I really mean it. I think the lieutenant governor position is the smartest people run for that because it is such a unique position and you can do so much with it. So, but before we go there, I do have to ask you, really, what is population health management? Explain that.
Yeah, so I'm a nurse as well. So I worked in healthcare for decades, and basically population health management is public health. So I worked for the CDC and I was an epidemic intelligence service officer. So I investigated outbreaks. I did all of these things within public health, but really it's just trying to make the population of where we live healthier. And so whether that's with clean air, clean water, good food, good jobs, I mean, these are all the things that contribute to public health and population health management. So, and I think of policies as just an extension of that. So if we can put policy out there that helps people be healthy, then that's a great way to be able to improve everything within our communities.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I don't think, I've been doing town halls for 30 years. Maybe I shouldn't be counting. I don't know if I did them for the county board, but other public situations. Healthcare comes up no matter what the issue du jour is. If you don't have quality healthcare, you don't have that quality of life that people are looking for them and their families. So, having that background. Another thing that caught my eye was, and another thing I greatly respect, are people who served in the Peace Corps. You served in the Peace Corps in Samoa. and you also volunteered with the World Health Organization.
I
So
did.
tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was a Peace Corps volunteer. So I went after college. I got a degree in neuroscience in college. That was my first bachelor's degree.
Wow.
And that basically prepares you to either get your PhD or drive a taxi cab. So that's basically
Right.
it. So I was thinking I was going to get my PhD and go into that science world. And then I had the Peace Corps application in front of me, and that application got finished, and the PhD application did not. And so I went to Samoa in the South Pacific, and I did health education, so HIV/AIDS education, reproductive health. It was really an amazing time for me to be able to do that. I joke it's kind of like my dog years. You're really young.
Yeah.
And it's like 7 years in one. Like you just kind of have to grow up and be able to figure things out. And so while I was there, the World Health Organization was working in the country, and I worked with them on quite a few HIV/AIDS projects. And that's when I decided, hey, public health is for me. I love healthcare. Came back, got my nursing degree, got my master's in public health, and just decided that this was where I was going to spend my career. I did not think I was going to spend it in politics. That is something that I did not think I was going to do.
Well, I'm glad you wound up pivoting because I think it benefits everyone. Thank you for your service in the Peace Corps. You know, I know Wisconsin, especially UW-Madison, has this really great tradition of so many volunteers. And we have a lot of returned Peace Corps volunteers here. So when you look at some of the debate around World Health Organization right now, federally, even the Peace Corps, believe it or not, is being debated. You know, how does that make you feel when you know the important work you did and you see us doing what we're doing now as a nation? What are your thoughts on that?
It's so frustrating to me, honestly. I mean, first they came for AmeriCorps, and they're taking folks out of our communities who are working on really good things. These folks are serving. They're not making a lot of money. They are choosing to serve in their community to make sure that they can give back. It's the same thing with the Peace Corps. Going overseas, making sure you can serve, and showing people overseas, what the United States is all about. Yeah. And when you talk about, you've talked about it on the federal level, that, our reputation overseas is really, really important. And programs like the Peace Corps are able to have people volunteering locally in communities, and they see that the United States is there to help, that these are folks you can trust, and that, we can spread that type of message all across the world. And it would be an absolute tragedy if they cut the Peace Corps, the AmeriCorps, these types of programs that allow younger people to be able to serve in country or out of country and be able to bring those US and American values all across the states and all across the world.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for your service. But I think we brought you on to talk about your political career now a little more. But so let's go to there. You just said you didn't plan on being in state government. What made you run for the state legislature?
So it was 2019, 2020, and it was COVID. And I was just so frustrated and angry with what the legislature was not doing. They didn't meet for 8 months during COVID. We needed leadership, and they didn't meet at all. And so when that assembly seat came up, I thought that I could make a difference, right? So I'm a nurse, I've worked in public health, I've done disease outbreak investigations. It's something that I'm familiar with. Maybe I can make a difference within the assembly. So I decided to run, and I live in Waukesha County. I live in the city of Waukesha County. So it was, a Republican seat at the time. So was able to run, talked about those types of values, talked about bringing that clinical experience into the assembly, and was able to win that seat by just a tiny little percentage point. But I loved working there. I loved working in policy. I loved being able to represent those constituents. And so when they mapped me out of my seat, which they tend to do, and then Mandela Barnes decided to run for Senate, as we know. And so the lieutenant governor seat became available. And I thought about it a long time about whether or not this is something I wanted to do. But having that microphone, particularly having the healthcare background and being able to talk about things on the statewide level was really appealing to me, and being able to serve in that way.
Yeah. And not many people on their resume put they beat a Republican incumbent.
Yeah. That's true. There's only two, right, that for that particular cycle. And with those gerrymandered maps, there were only three. that we were able to flip, and mine was one of them. So I thought that was, but now we've got more fair maps in Wisconsin, which is fantastic. So we're a little bit more evenly divided, which is what we should be. We're purple. Yeah. We're a purple state, right?
Yeah.
So that I think we're going to see a lot more folks who are going to be able to either flip seats, to Democrats coming up in these next cycle.
What was it like serving when we had that incredibly gerrymandered map where we were fairly deep in the minority?
It was so frustrating because it just felt like, you couldn't even get anything to be debated.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't bring it up in committee, any sort of legislation, particularly if it came from us. And you couldn't, even things that we knew were really popular in Wisconsin, like Medicaid expansion, we couldn't even get a hearing on it, much less being able to actually get a vote on it on the floor. And so it's frustrating when you're there, but it's also frustrating for constituents who want you to work for them, who want you to work across the aisle. But you have to explain to them, look, the majority party is the one who decides what goes to committee. The majority party is the one who decides whether or not something comes up for a vote. So you got to put pressure on those representatives as well to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. So when you ran for lieutenant governor, what was going through your head about what you wanted to try to do and why that was the office that you ultimately decided to run for?
So there's a couple things that I wanted to focus on. I mean, of course, healthcare is one of them, which is a big passion of mine. And I wanted to try to make sure we're still having that conversation about Medicaid expansion in Wisconsin. And as you know, we're one of 10 states that has not expanded Medicaid. And we're only one of 2 states that hasn't expanded 12 months postpartum, which is shockingly embarrassing to me. And so I wanted to focus on that, but also focus on some larger pieces. So housing is something that's really been a passion of mine as well. And there's a part of that that's public health, right? If you don't have a roof over your head or you can't afford your housing, there are so many other things that you're not going to be able to take care of. And your health is one of them. And so how can we look at Wisconsin to be able to have affordable and workforce housing across the state? We know it's an issue. I go to all 72 counties every year in this role, and I hear very similar things. I don't care where I'm at, urban, rural, suburban, I hear about housing. I hear about housing, I hear about healthcare, and I hear about childcare. These are 3 things that are consistent all across the state. And so trying to make sure we have somebody in this office that can help to advocate for those policies, I thought was important.
Yeah. So talk about how, you've taken those on as lieutenant governor. Because I do think, again, it is such a unique role. I remember when, going back to when I was in college, Sharon Metz from Green Bay ran for lieutenant governor, but then, people that Barbara Lawton and others that we've worked with, all did it in such a unique way. That's why I think it's like the hidden position. People don't really understand the flexibility you have. So what have you done for some of those key issues? What uniquely has been branded by you in your office?
So we did the healthcare workforce task force. So we know that there's an enormous shortage of nurses across Wisconsin. So we got all the stakeholders together. We were able to put out several policy recommendations on how we could not only graduate more healthcare providers, nurses being a big focus of that, but also how do we retain them in Wisconsin? We know that we have an outflow of our population, particularly our young people are leaving. How do we keep them here? How do we make sure that we are supporting them when they're here? And so had several policy recommendations that came out of that. And one of them is to get more revenue in the door, which is Medicaid expansion. And then be able to pay for some of these types of initiatives. Those initiatives were all included in the governor's budget, which he has proposed and is sitting with the Joint Finance Committee. And as you know, it can be frustrating, but they stripped out many of those provisions that would be able to help us be able to increase our healthcare workforce, to be able to do that. Secondly, I'm the chair of the Interagency Council on Homelessness. And so making sure that I'm talking about how we can do better in terms of policy arenas or administratively, how we can do better to make sure that we can get housing where it needs to be. And that's a long-term goal, is to make sure, because it does take a while to be able to build and be able to make some of these changes. I would say we should have been starting 10 years ago on some of these things. And now it's become such a crisis. And I have an 18-year-old son who is going out into the world as an adult. Somehow he's an adult. I don't know how that happened, but somehow he's an adult.
Right.
And I want him to be able to stay in Wisconsin. I want him to be able to get married and have a good job and buy a house and have, kids here. And if that's not going to be affordable for him if we don't put the work in right now.
Sure. Well, and what I loved is I had the chance to see you on the campaign trail a number of times. And the first time, because we never had the pleasure of serving together in the legislature, I was like, wow, you were extremely articulate. You shared your story, I think, really, really well with folks. It was incredibly authentic. And trust me, I've seen people try to be authentic. It doesn't work. You have to either be authentic or not, but you connected so well with folks. And, I just wanted you to know that as someone who's been doing this for 30 years, like I remember, in fact, you spoke once at the barn in Iowa County. It was during the election cycle. Remember the one with it's a wedding venue and all that?
Yes.
You were amazing there. So, I'm very happy and proud that you're doing all the things that you're doing on your goals as lieutenant governor. You and the governor as a team have had also goals. What are some of the bigger successes that you've all been able to have despite this gerrymandered legislature until just recently, where at least now we've picked up numbers, but the Republicans are still in control? What are some of the other things that you've been able to work with the governor on that I think you as a team are really proud of?
Yeah, I do think we make a really good team because he's got that education background. I've got the healthcare background. Those are two things that are really important to folks in Wisconsin. I would say I think it's the funnier one with the budget where he was able to increase spending for schools by doing his line item veto.
Yeah.
That was great because here's the thing. Like again, I've got a 16 and 18-year-old who went through public schools. Like we want our schools to be funded, and the proof's in the pudding because every time they put out a referendum, it almost always goes through within our communities. Right. And so people are voting to increase their taxes to make sure that they have the services they have in public schools. So I think that was a really good one.
Can you explain it just because some folks aren't from Wisconsin who are going to be listening?
Yeah. Okay. So the governor has an interesting veto power on the budget where he can individually cross out certain numbers and put it together. And so what he was able to do was put in perpetuity, basically, increases every year for public schools. Now we have to still budget for it, but basically saying for over 400 years, he's going to be able to do increases in the budget, which is great. Yeah.
That's a very creative use.
It was a very creative use. It was a chaos for good, right? Yeah. Yes. To kind of do that, to be able to do that. I do think this last legislative session, we had some good bipartisan support for some housing bills to be able to put more dollars within housing. So through WIDA, which is our housing authority here in Wisconsin, we were able to put some dollars into affordable housing over businesses. So those downtown areas within some of our communities, you've got the stores at the bottom, and then what we were able to do was be able to have some funding to be able to renovate housing on top. And that not only works well for housing, especially because it'll be more affordable, but that helps revitalize your downtown.
Yeah, totally.
So if you've got a restaurant underneath you, I don't know if I would cook a whole lot, right? I think if I'm smelling burgers, from down, at the bottom, that might be my, outdoor kitchen, so to speak. And you're going to shop downtown. You're going to do those types of things. And some of them, and then we put it out there, we did it. And then, we found out that it was a little bit challenging for people to use. So this next session, they went ahead and expanded those guidelines so that it would be easier to use to be able to do some of those renovations for housing and be able to do some of that affordable and workforce housing. There's still so much more work to be done. But I do think that, as we're moving forward, that's going to be one way that we can get these things done. And of course, the governor did such fantastic work with the ARPA dollars. I mean, we were able to put so much in workforce development, more than many of the other states, with the money that came in from COVID. And that is going to have continuing effects later on within our state. I mean, we were beating the unemployment nationally by almost a percentage point for a while. Now you got to work with me, my federal representative, because I'm a little worried about what they're planning on doing on the federal level and how that's going to affect Wisconsin. It is ugly. And I don't know how anybody can think that you can pull this many dollars out of an economy and not have a downstream, effect. People are going to lose jobs because of what they're doing. People are going to lose healthcare because of what they are doing. And that is so frustrating to me, because we want to make sure that we have some stability on the Wisconsin side, because it's just absolute chaos on the federal at the federal level. And that's what I hear from businesses. Yeah. Small businesses, big businesses, they can't plan. They don't know what to do, because tariff on, tariff off. This dollars are going away. These dollars are coming back. Oh, I'm not sure what's going to happen in a year. I mean, can you imagine that just as a family budget, if you had no idea what you were going to be paid next month? Yeah. What would you do? You'd skinny down your budget. You wouldn't spend a lot of money. You'd be concerned about it until you could see what would be sussed out. And that's what I'm hearing from businesses across Wisconsin.
Yeah. How about, and I think you mentioned, at least you inferred it before, about biggest disappointment with the Republican legislature. Medicaid expansion, I'm sure, is on that list.
Yes, but, yes. Well, it is because we know it's popular, right? Yeah. We know that over 60% of Wisconsinites want us to expand Medicaid. They do. And we are unique in Wisconsin, is that we did expand Medicaid, just not to the Affordable Care Act's requirement. So we are missing out, and I know you know this, but we are missing out on a 90% match from the federal government. Yeah. And that is about $2 billion over the biennium that we as taxpayers are paying, that we could have been getting from the federal government. Think of what we could do with that. Yeah. We could pay our home care individuals better and more. We could attract more nurses to the state. We could help with roads and do all of these other things, these healthcare issues that we have. We could be able to invest in Wisconsin with that $2 billion. And they have left that on the table for 10 years. That is just shameful. But I do want to talk about the 12-month postpartum expansion. Yeah. So basically, we are only one of two states, us and Arkansas, that has not.
Okay.
Arkansas. I'm not sure I want to be on the list with Arkansas, right? Yeah. Just two of us have not expanded 12 months postpartum. It passed in the state Senate almost unanimously. Wow. And the bill in the assembly, it actually has the number of signatures on it who have signed on to this bill is enough to get it to pass in the assembly. Wow. But they won't bring it up for a vote. Wow. So, and that's leadership. That's the Republican leadership that we have there. When we know it's popular, when we know that the senators and the assembly members want to be able to pass this type of legislation, and refusing to bring it up for a vote, even though Wisconsinites want it. So those are the kind of things that when we're talking about keeping our representatives accountable, those are the kind of things we need to talk about, which is these are popular initiatives in Wisconsin, and we can't even get it to come up for a vote. That's terrible.
And now we're cutting Medicaid, and those cuts are going to have ripple effects to the state. Have you at all started to look at, because the bill's only passed the House, right? Has there been some initial conversations about the impact that this will have?
So initial conversations, we've done a little bit more math on some of the food stamp cuts and what they're planning on doing. And that's like $350 million that would be sitting on Wisconsin's shoulders if we wanted to stay even for food stamps. And that's food. I mean, come on, people, like this isn't anything that people shouldn't have. This is a basic need of individuals. So is healthcare. And when they're talking about cutting Medicaid, they're talking about putting all these paperwork requirements, into place. So my dad was on Medicaid. So and I'll tell you, so he served, he was in the Navy, he served during Vietnam, worked every day of his life, right? Worked the Friday before he got diagnosed with Alzheimer's on Monday.
Wow.
And if you know anything about dementia, that just sucks every dollar out of your budget. And he wasn't a wealthy man to begin with. He fixed telephones for Wisconsin Bell. My mom was a teaching assistant. Like, these are not wealthy people. And so at the end of his life, he qualified for Medicaid. And it was such a blessing for our family that he was able to be taken care of within long-term care. And we were so appreciative of that. And I kept him, he stayed in my house. My mom still lives with me, but I kept him in my house to help her take care of him for years. And, but I will tell you, filing for Medicaid for my father, even though I'm a nurse, I have worked in executive positions, I have a master's degree, I have a spouse, and and one job, not two jobs, one job, right? It is the most stressful thing I have ever had to do, is fill out that Medicaid application. Because there's so many requirements. And if anybody thinks that there's a huge percentage of people who are somehow gaming this system, that is just absolute garbage, because it was so difficult. I would send it in and there'd be one other piece of information that they would need. And then I'd have to dig through all of this documentation to send it in again. And then there's another piece of information that they need, and send it in again. There are guardrails to make sure that people aren't using this inappropriately. So much so that I think if I wasn't who I am and I didn't know for sure that he qualified for Medicaid, I might have quit. I might have said, this is too hard. And
I forget what state that did this, and 70% of the people that got kicked off were eligible still for Medicaid, but couldn't get through the process that you're talking about, because of doing what now the Republicans are proposing to do in every state that this state did on its own.
Yes, that's going to be awful. And if we don't think that's going to affect people who have private insurance, it is. So I worked as a healthcare executive within a large healthcare system, and we know that Medicaid pays for almost 40% of births in Wisconsin. That's a huge percentage of people who are on Medicaid. And our rural hospitals, the vast majority of people who come to our rural hospitals are on Medicaid or are on Medicare. And so if you're cutting Medicaid and you're cutting Medicare, I don't know how those rural hospitals survive. They're already struggling to survive. So are we going to have women who have to travel 3 hours to a hospital to have a baby? That's dangerous. What if you get into a car accident and there's no hospital close to you? People are going to suffer because of this. And that's what I think is so shameful, and that they're not telling the truth, right? They're not telling the truth about cutting Medicaid and now cutting Medicare, as well as food stamps. They are cutting those services, and it's going to affect all of us.
1.3 million people in Wisconsin, right? Get Medicaid. 1 out of 3 kids gets their health insurance from Medicaid. Your dad and my mom, that was on Medicaid in her final years in nursing home. 55% of seniors in nursing homes get their support from Medicaid, and 45% of adults living independently with disabilities get their support through Medicaid. So that's the issue. On the food assistance, you brought that up, and that's one where, as you would expect, Wisconsin had one of the lowest error rates in the country. Does one of the best jobs of administering it. Right now, it's a split. The administrative cost 50% at the state, 50% federal. Under the Republican House bill, that'll pass 75% of the administrative costs onto the state. But also the way they're doing the error rate, Derek Van Orden, who represents Wisconsin's 3rd district, who some have said may not be the sharpest crayon in the box, said he recently helped to fix the error rate issue. Well, that fix, whatever that was, it looks like right now, at minimum, you would now be on the hook for 15% of all the food costs as well, despite having one of the very best success rates in the country. So, there's no question that also is going to have ripple effects and
Yeah.
hurt people. And it's the number one program that keeps kids out of poverty in the country. And unfortunately, it's all being pushed to say, state, you pick all this up or else people aren't going to get food.
Right. And it's food. It's food.
Yeah, food. Right.
And, I visited several food pantries before the holidays, October, November time, and they're already at capacity. They were already at capacity October and November.
Yeah.
And so if we think that these food pantries are going to be able to absorb a lot of these cuts, they're just not going to be able to do that. Plus, they've already cut, some of our farmers who have already planted, have already bought the seeds to be able to actually sell some of their product to places like food pantries or to, some of these boxes that they can send out. Now that was being cut. Right. And so now if you think about those ripple effects, so now our farmers are going to have issues with crops they can't sell, or they've already put dollars into what they were going to be able to plant this year. And now the food pantries are not going to be able to get that food at cost. And they're going to it's going to be more expensive for them to buy it. And we're cutting food stamps. And so we're putting so much pressure on our local communities to be able to try to do this. And there's just no way we can expect the state government and philanthropy or not-for-profits to be able to take up the role of the federal government.
Yeah.
We can't do that. And so this is why I've been encouraging people to say, this is not a done deal. Yeah, It passed the House. It still has to pass the Senate. And if you don't want this, then you need to be putting pressure on your representatives, on your senators to make sure that they're not voting for these draconian cuts.
Yeah. No, thank you for doing that. And you're exactly right. In fact, on the original version that the Senate was working on, their own bill, they only have 2% of the cuts of what the House had. So I know it's going to be somewhere between the two bills, I think, clearly. But the House had the most draconian measures possible. And unfortunately, they also passed it in the middle of the night. So let's go a little lighter. Like I said, you're a great team with the governor, but here's the question.
Okay.
Do you play euchre with the governor?
Oh, I do not. I have not played euchre with the governor. I know. I should. I was never a big euchre player. My family was more of a poker player. Yeah. So all the weddings, funerals, all those things, we had cutthroat poker games. Yeah. So poker games. So I'm gonna maybe see if I can get him into a poker game. See how well he bluffs.
And he'll be playing euchre rules, and you'll get him. No question. That's good. Are there any people that you're watching right now early? And this is clearly early, but the media is already talking about the next presidential election.
Yeah.
Likely both the Democrats and Republicans are going to have no incumbent, right? Because they won't.
Yeah. Any
of the current Democrats out there you're watching that you are intrigued by?
What I think is so great is we have such a deep bench.
We do.
There are so many governors of states. There are so many senators. There are, folks in the House that I think would do an amazing job as president. And they're thoughtful, and they've thought about policies, and they know how to talk to people directly. That is something that I'm not worried about. I'm not worried about us having a really good candidate coming up for this next election. And we know what the Republicans are going to put up. It's going to be the same sort of MAGA type people that they've put up in the past, which we know isn't popular. We know that the rest of the United States doesn't want those type of policies. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation and that discussion and supporting whoever it is that ends up getting through that primary. And I will be happy with anyone who gets through that primary because we do have such a deep bench.
I had dinner with some members recently, and we literally within about 3 minutes had a list of 20 people we think that could be running, right? So there's so many possibilities. The downside to that is we don't have a singular head of the party either, right? That sometimes can, make things slightly more difficult. But I do think that people are getting their sea legs now on this front. I think you're seeing the pushback more, which is good. Tell us something about Sara Rodriguez that people do not know, right here. You're breaking it on the
Ooh.
podcast. What should we know about Sara Rodriguez?
Okay. I've got one. So
Okay.
I do archery. And
Whoa, I didn't know
I
that.
know. And I don't shoot at living things that move, mostly because of skill. But I'm also a level 1 archery instructor. So I take my daughter out all the time to
That's very
shoot.
cool.
So yeah, and it's fun. It is. It's a lot of fun. And there's a bunch of different outdoor ranges in Waukesha County that I go to. I find it very sort of relaxing to be able to do that and try to be able to get that done. Another funny fact is, so I've been doing this for a while, and they kind of changed the rules on what you do. But I'm right-handed. I've always been right-handed. I shoot left-handed, which is weird, right? Like the only thing I do left-handed. But my son is left-handed, so I don't know. Like it's kind of interesting. So
that's how you learn to do something sometimes in your body.
So when I first got taught how to shoot, they did eye dominance kind of stuff, and they checked to see which eye was dominant. And so I ended up being a lefty on that. And so I just continued to shoot left, which I think is really interesting.
So I think I see either a poker tournament or archery tournament fundraiser in the future.
Yes.
Sara Rodriguez. All right. Anything else you want to add, let listeners know before we wrap up?
I have such faith in Wisconsin, and I so appreciate when I get to travel all across the 72 counties that, our jobs, there's so much partisanship within our jobs, but you don't see that on the ground when you go and visit people and you talk to them. And there is more that, connects us than divides us. And I just want to make sure that we're listening to folks and we're holding our elected officials accountable. And we should continue to call and do the things we need to do to make sure that they're following through with what they said they were going to do. And so just keep doing it. Keep fighting the good fight, Mark.
Well, and thank you for all that you're doing as Lieutenant Governor, all the work on healthcare, all the work on housing, all the work on childcare. There's so many things that we can do if we let government work with folks and get these things done, and appreciate all you're doing. How can people follow you if they want to follow you on social media? What are your preferred social media platforms that you put information out on?
So I've got a couple of different ones. I've got my official one for Lieutenant Governor Sara Rodriguez. When I put out a policy position, it doesn't get as much attention as when I put my dog on there, because it's much more fun to look at dogs. So.
The only policy, or I shouldn't say policy, the only improvement, I think, going to federal government from state, because I really did love my time in the state government, was you don't allow dogs in the state capitol in offices. We have 5 office dogs in DC.
Oh my gosh.
Not once, but any one day. I've got a variety of puppies in the office.
Dogs that you can pet.
Yes.
That's like my best day when I get to go to like a farm and I get to pet the farm dog. Like that's so much fun.
I think we could get some bipartisan support to change that.
Yeah.
We need to. All right. Well, Sara Rodriguez, Lieutenant Governor of Wisconsin, thank you so much for being with us today. And we look forward to following all that you're getting done in Wisconsin. Thank you again.
All right. Thanks, Mark.